Imagine getting fined by the HOA for the color of your car. Sounds crazy, right? Well, let me tell you about the time Karen from my HOA decided my car's color was a crime. Buckle up. This story is about to blow your mind. It was just another peaceful morning, or at least I thought it would be. I had just poured my first cup of coffee and was ready to enjoy some quiet time on the porch. That's when I noticed something odd on my driveway. There was a bright yellow notice stuck to the windshield of my car, a car I had parked in the exact same spot for years without any issues. My curiosity quickly turned to confusion. What now? I muttered under my breath as I walked over to investigate. The notice had HOA violation printed in bold letters at the top. My immediate thought was that maybe I had parked slightly crooked or too close to the curb. But nope, it was way more absurd than that. In bold black ink, it read, "Your vehicle's color does not align with the aesthetic standard of the neighborhood and is therefore in violation of HOA guidelines." I literally had to reread it to make sure I wasn't imagining things. The color of my car was a problem now? I stood there for a second, dumbfounded. It was a blue sedan, nothing flashy, just a regular blue car, the kind you'd see parked in any suburban neighborhood across America. I wasn't driving a neon green sports car with flames painted on the side or anything outrageous. And that's when it hit me. This had Karen's fingerprints all over it. You know the type. Every neighborhood has a Karen. The self-appointed HOA cop who thinks they run the place. If a blade of grass is half an inch too tall, Karen's on it. Trash bins out 2 minutes past collection time? You better believe Karen's knocking on your door. And now, apparently, she had decided to come after my car. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. Maybe this was just a mistake, I thought. Maybe someone on the HOA board had misfiled a complaint. But deep down, I knew better. Karen was notorious for making up rules as she went along, and most of the neighbors had just learned to grin and bear it. But not me. I wasn't about to let this slide without getting to the bottom of it. I marched back into the house, grabbed my phone, and snapped a picture of the notice. Then I pulled up the HOA guidelines from the email they had sent out last year. I skimmed through every single page. Rules about landscaping, house paint, even mailbox designs. But guess what? Not a single word about car colors. So where exactly was this violation coming from? I decided to take matters into my own hands. I dialed the HOA's contact number, fully prepared to have a polite but firm conversation with whoever answered. After a few rings, the familiar voice of Karen herself came through the line. "Hello, this is Karen with the HOA," she said, her tone already dripping with condescension. "Hi Karen, this is your name. I just found a violation notice on my car, and I'm a little confused. It says my car color isn't approved. Can you explain that?" There was a brief pause, and then she let out a sigh, the kind of sigh that says, "Ugh, why are you bothering me with this?" "Well," she began, "we've recently decided that certain colors can be disruptive to the neighborhood's visual harmony." Visual harmony? I almost laughed out loud. "Disruptive?" I echoed. "It's just a blue sedan. What exactly is disruptive about that?" "Well, it doesn't blend well with the neutral tones we've established for the community," she explained, as if that made perfect sense. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Karen, there's nothing in the HOA guidelines about car colors. I've read through them." "That may be true," she admitted reluctantly. "But as a member of the HOA board, I have the right to interpret the guidelines in the best interest of the neighborhood." Interpret the guidelines? This was beyond ridiculous. I knew then and there that I wasn't going to let her get away with this nonsense. I decided to push back. "Karen, with all due respect, you can't just make up rules on the fly and expect people to follow them. If there's no written policy about car colors, this violation notice doesn't hold any weight." Her tone shifted, becoming defensive. "Well, if you have an issue, you're welcome to bring it up at the next HOA meeting," she said curtly. "Oh, I will," I assured her. As I hung up the phone, my mind was already racing with how I was going to handle this. One thing was clear. Karen had picked the wrong person to mess with this time. I wasn't just fighting for my blue car. I was standing up against the pettiness and power trips that Karen had inflicted on the entire neighborhood for far too long. This was only the beginning. So there I was, fresh off that absurd phone call with Karen, wondering how on earth the color of my perfectly normal blue sedan had suddenly become a neighborhood crime. I couldn't wrap my head around it. This wasn't some gated community with pristine golf courses and white glove inspections. It was just your average suburban neighborhood where people parked minivans and pickup trucks without a second thought. But Karen? Oh, Karen had apparently decided that she was the authority on what cars were aesthetically acceptable. After that phone call, I tried to go about my day, but the whole situation kept gnawing at me. I mean, come on, what was next? Was she going to fine people for the color of their garden hoses or the shade of their front doormats? Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear my head. As I strolled down the street, I couldn't help but notice all the cars parked in driveways and along the curbs. Red cars, black cars, silver SUVs. There was even a bright green Jeep parked a few houses down. None of these seemed to have earned a violation notice. So why my blue car? That's when I spotted Karen herself, standing in her front yard, arms crossed like she was on patrol. She was talking to another neighbor, probably spreading the gospel of neighborhood harmony. I figured this was as good a time as any to get some answers. "Hey, Karen," I called out as I approached. She turned, her face instantly tightening as if she knew I wasn't there for a friendly chat. "Oh, hello," she said, her tone as frosty as ever. "I was just taking a walk and couldn't help but notice something," I began casually. "There are plenty of cars around here in all sorts of colors, but I'm the only one who got a violation notice. Care to explain why that is?" Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well," she huffed, "those other cars blend more naturally with the neighborhood's aesthetic." I raised an eyebrow. "Blend naturally? Karen, there's a bright green Jeep parked 3 houses down. You're telling me that blends better than my blue sedan?" She shifted uncomfortably. "The Jeep belongs to one of the board members," she said, as if that somehow justified it. There it was, the good old double standard. One rule for Karen and her HOA cronies, another for the rest of us mere mortals. "Karen, be honest," I pressed. "This isn't really about the color of my car, is it?" She folded her arms defensively. "I simply believe in maintaining a certain standard for our community, that's all. A standard that you just made up," I pointed out. "There's nothing in the HOA guidelines about car colors, and you know it." Her eyes narrowed. "If you don't like the way the HOA operates, maybe you should consider moving." Oh, that was rich. I had lived in this neighborhood for years, long before Karen had declared herself queen of the HOA. And now she was telling me to move? "Karen, with all due respect, this is my home," I said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere. And neither is my car." She let out an exasperated sigh. "Fine. If you want to make this a bigger issue, I'll see you at the next HOA meeting." "You can count on it," I said, turning to walk away. As I headed back home, I couldn't help but shake my head at the sheer pettiness of it all. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was creating them out of thin air to flex her authority. And I wasn't the only one who had fallen victim to her nonsense. When I got back to my house, I decided it was time to rally some support. I started texting a few neighbors, asking if they had ever received similar ridiculous violation notices. The responses poured in almost immediately. One neighbor, Lisa, said Karen had fined her for having too many flower pots on her porch. Another neighbor, Tom, told me Karen had once threatened to report him for leaving his garage door open too long. The stories just kept coming, each one more absurd than the last. It was clear that Karen had turned the HOA into her own personal fiefdom, and most of the neighbors were too fed up or too intimidated to fight back. But not me. This wasn't just about my blue car anymore. It was about standing up to the petty tyranny that Karen had imposed on our community. And I was just getting started. After Karen's outrageous complaint about my car's color and that infuriating conversation, I knew I had to take action. I wasn't going to let her get away with enforcing rules that didn't even exist. My blue sedan wasn't just a car anymore. It was a symbol of my stand against petty HOA nonsense. The next day, I woke up determined. The first thing I did was print out a copy of the official HOA guidelines. I highlighted every section that dealt with parking regulations, aesthetic requirements, and vehicle restrictions. Guess what? Not a single mention of car colors. Nope. A harmonious neighborhood palette. No approved color chart. Nothing. Armed with my evidence, I knew my next move was clear. I was going to the HOA board meeting, and I was going to make sure Karen's antics were exposed. But I wasn't going to do this alone. Karen had made enough enemies in the neighborhood, and I figured it was time we all stood up to her together. I started knocking on doors, talking to neighbors, and sharing my story. Lisa, the neighbor who had been fined for having too many flower pots, was the first to join me. "I've had it with her," she said, shaking her head. "She even measured the height of my hedges once." Tom, who had been threatened for leaving his garage door open, was just as fed up. "She's on a power trip," he said. "I'll back you up." As word spread, more and more neighbors came forward with their own stories. Karen had fined someone for having a basketball hoop in their driveway, told another neighbor their front door color was too bright, and even complained about someone's holiday decorations being too extravagant. By the time the HOA meeting rolled around, I had a small army of residents ready to speak up. The meeting was held in the community center, a modest room with folding chairs and a long table where the HOA board members sat. Karen, of course, was front and center, looking as smug as ever. As soon as the meeting started, I raised my hand. "Yes, your name?" the board president said. "I'd like to address a recent violation notice I received," I said, standing up. It was issued by Karen, claiming that the color of my car doesn't align with the aesthetic standards of the neighborhood. There were murmurs from the crowd. I held up the HOA guidelines. "I've reviewed the official rules, and there's absolutely nothing in here about car colors, so I'd like to know why I was fined." Karen's face turned red, but she maintained her composure. "As I explained before," she said, "the HOA has the right to interpret the guidelines to maintain the community's visual harmony." "Interpret?" I said, my voice steady but firm. "Or make up rules as you go." The board president looked uncomfortable. "Karen, is it true that there's no written rule about car colors?" Karen's lips thinned. "Technically no, but..." "Then why was I fined?" I interrupted. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but another neighbor, Lisa, stood up. "Karen fined me for having too many flower pots," she said. "That's not in the guidelines either." Tom chimed in next. "She told me I couldn't leave my garage door open for more than 10 minutes. Show me where that's written down." One by one, neighbors shared their stories, each more ridiculous than the last. The board members exchanged uneasy glances as it became clear just how out of control Karen's rulemaking had become. The board president finally spoke up. "It seems we need to revisit how violations are being issued and ensure they're based on actual written rules, not interpretations." Karen's face was a mix of anger and embarrassment. "I was just trying to maintain the neighborhood's standards," she said defensively. "With all due respect, Karen," I said, "you've been overstepping your authority. This isn't about maintaining standards. It's about control." The room fell silent. The board president nodded. "We'll be reviewing all recent violation notices and voiding any that don't align with the official guidelines," he announced. "And moving forward, any new rules will need to be formally documented and approved by the board before being enforced." There was a wave of applause from the neighbors. As the meeting wrapped up, Karen slinked out of the room without making eye contact with anyone. Several neighbors came up to thank me for speaking up. "You really stood your ground," Tom said with a grin. "Someone had to," I replied. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen might have been knocked down a peg, but people like her don't give up that easily. And I was ready for whatever came next. You'd think that after that fiery HOA meeting, Karen would have learned her lesson. For a while, it even seemed like she had. The violation notice about my blue car was officially voided, and the board sent out an email clarifying that all future complaints had to be backed by written rules from the official HOA guidelines. It was a small but satisfying victory for me and my neighbors. But here's the thing about people like Karen. They don't take defeat lightly. And just when I thought the drama was over, she pulled a move that nobody saw coming. A few weeks went by, and things in the neighborhood felt refreshingly peaceful. I even started parking my blue sedan in the driveway with a little extra pride, knowing that it had become a symbol of standing up to Karen's nonsense. Neighbors who had previously kept quiet were now more vocal, openly questioning HOA rules and pushing back when things didn't make sense. It felt like the community had found its backbone. But Karen? Oh, she had gone suspiciously quiet. No passive-aggressive emails, no surprise inspections, no nitpicky complaints about flower pots or garage doors. It was almost eerie. I should have known better than to trust the calm. One sunny afternoon, I was working in the garage when a delivery truck pulled up. The driver got out, carrying what looked like an official letter. "Are you your name?" he asked. "Yep, that's me," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. He handed me the envelope. "Certified mail. Need your signature." I signed for it. My curiosity piqued. As the truck drove away, I tore open the envelope and pulled out the letter. My jaw practically hit the floor. It was from the HOA's legal team. According to the letter, Karen had filed a formal complaint, alleging that I had disrupted the harmony of the neighborhood by inciting unrest among residents and challenging the authority of the HOA. The letter claimed that my actions had led to a hostile environment and that the board was considering legal action if I continued to undermine community standards. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Was this some kind of joke? Karen was actually trying to paint me as a troublemaker for standing up to her nonsense. I knew I couldn't handle this alone, so I called up Lisa and Tom to fill them in. They were just as shocked as I was. "This is insane," Lisa said. "She's the one who created the hostile environment, not you." "She's just trying to intimidate you," Tom added. "Don't let her get away with it." We decided to rally the neighbors again. If Karen wanted to play dirty, we were going to show her that the entire community was done with her tyranny. A week later, the HOA held a special meeting to address Karen's complaint. The room was packed, more neighbors than I'd ever seen at one of these meetings. Word had spread about Karen's latest stunt, and people were fired up. The board president opened the meeting. "We've received a formal complaint from Karen alleging that your name has been disruptive to the community. We're here to hear both sides and make a decision." Karen stood up, her expression smug. "Thank you," she said. "I'd like to start by saying that I only have the best interests of the neighborhood at heart, but certain individuals have made it their mission to undermine the HOA and create chaos," she went on, painting me as some kind of neighborhood rebel who was stirring up trouble just for the sake of it. When she finally finished, I stood up. "With all due respect, Karen, this isn't about me being disruptive. This is about you being unwilling to accept that the community is tired of your power trips." I held up the certified letter. "You had the nerve to send me a legal threat for standing up to your nonsense. But guess what? The neighbors are done being bullied by you." Lisa and Tom stood up beside me, followed by other neighbors. One by one, they shared their stories of Karen's overreach, the flower pot fines, the garage door complaints, the absurd nitpicking. It all came out. The board members looked increasingly uncomfortable as the floodgates opened. Finally, the board president spoke up. "It's clear that there's been a pattern of overreach here. We appreciate everyone sharing their experiences." He turned to Karen. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as a member of the HOA board." The room erupted into applause. Karen's face turned beet red as she gathered her things and stormed out. It was a surreal moment. After years of Karen's nonsense, the community had finally taken back control. As the meeting wrapped up, neighbors came up to thank me. "You really stood your ground," Lisa said. "We couldn't have done it without you," Tom added. I smiled, feeling a sense of pride. This wasn't just my victory, it was a victory for the entire neighborhood. And as for Karen, well, let's just say the neighborhood was a lot more peaceful without her self-imposed reign of terror. But the story wasn't over just yet. After Karen's dramatic exit from the HOA board, life in the neighborhood took a turn for the better. The heavy cloud of her petty rules and power trips had finally lifted, and it was like the entire community could breathe again. Neighbors who used to keep their heads down now walked with a new sense of pride. Lisa added more flower pots to her front yard without a second thought. Tom left his garage door open whenever he pleased. And me, I parked my blue car in the driveway every single day, right where it belonged. You'd think that after being booted from the HOA board, Karen would have taken a long, hard look in the mirror and learned a thing or two about humility. But Karen being Karen, that wasn't exactly the case. At least not right away. For a while, she kept her distance from the neighborhood events. No surprise inspections, no nitpicking emails, and definitely no more fines for ridiculous violations. She seemed to vanish into the background, which was probably the best outcome anyone could have hoped for. But every now and then, we'd catch glimpses of her driving by, scowling at the cheerful holiday decorations or the neighbors enjoying their newfound freedom. It was clear that Karen was struggling to accept her fall from power. With Karen out of the picture, the HOA transformed. The board members, now free from Karen's overbearing influence, became more approachable and reasonable. They even started asking for community input before making decisions. A novel concept, I know. We organized a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate the positive changes. Everyone showed up, even people who had never bothered to come to HOA events before. Kids played in the yards without anyone worrying about unauthorized play equipment, and the smell of grilled burgers filled the air. Lisa raised a glass. "To standing up for what's right," she said. "To taking back our neighborhood," Tom added with a grin. It felt like a true victory, not just over Karen, but over the toxic culture she had created. A few months later, something unexpected happened. I was out mowing my lawn when I saw Karen walking down the street. She wasn't scowling or glaring. She just looked ordinary. "Hey," she said awkwardly as she approached. "Karen," I said, cautious but polite. She hesitated. "Look, I know I wasn't exactly neighborly before. I just wanted to say I might have gone a little overboard with some of the rules." A little overboard? That was the understatement of the year. But I could see that it wasn't easy for her to admit even that much. So I nodded. "It takes guts to say that. Thanks." She gave a small, sheepish smile. "Anyway, I'll let you get back to your lawn." As she walked away, I realized something. Maybe Karen had finally learned a lesson after all. And even if she hadn't, at least the neighborhood had moved on. In the end, Karen's reign had been a strange chapter in our neighborhood's history, but it had brought us together in ways we never expected. Standing up to her nonsense had empowered us to take ownership of our community and make it a better place. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about finding our voice and refusing to be pushed around. And as for me, well, I'm just happy to be part of a neighborhood where common sense finally won out. But if Karen ever tries to stage a comeback, let's just say we'll be ready.